In August 2013, the body of Lily Dawson, a 37-year-old mother of 5, was discovered dismembered in a freezer in Winter Haven, Florida. An investigation soon revealed the shocking and twisted history of the relationship between Pastor Caleb Dawson and his wife Lily, and the devastating betrayal that led to her tragic death. The revelation of Caleb's father, Jeremiah Dawson's, role in the affair, and the destruction of the family's once revered image would unearth a series of events that spiraled into unimaginable violence. On the 6th of August, 2013, the humid Florida heat weighed heavily over the quiet town of Winter Haven. That morning, the police department received an anonymous call from someone who claimed that a disturbing odor had been coming from the Dawson residence for days. The caller, clearly unsettled, didn't identify themselves, but insisted that something wasn't right in the house of the respected preacher and his family. Officers were dispatched to the Dawson home on Sycamore Lane, a modest 2-story house that had long been a symbol of warmth and community for their neighbors. As the officers arrived at the property, a strange silence seemed to hang over the neatly kept lawn. It was unusual for the house to be so still. Usually, children's laughter or Caleb's deep, booming voice could be heard from inside. But now, the air felt heavy, the world around it eerily quiet. The officers knocked several times but received no response. After a brief deliberation, and with the odor now clearly detectable from outside, they made the decision to enter. Inside, the Dawson home appeared deceptively normal at first glance. The living room was neatly arranged, with family portraits on the walls, and Caleb's Bible resting on a side table. A faint smell of cleaning chemicals lingered, but it did little to mask the unmistakable metallic tang of decay. The scent grew stronger as they moved through the house, eventually leading them to the basement. When the officers descended the narrow staircase, what awaited them was beyond anything they could have prepared for. In the corner of the basement, a freezer stood ominously humming. The foul odor was unmistakably coming from there. One officer hesitated before opening it, almost as if some instinct warned him of what he was about to uncover. When the lid was finally lifted, the scene was one of pure horror. Inside the freezer, wrapped tightly in garbage bags, were the dismembered remains of Lily Dawson, the wife of Pastor Caleb Dawson, and the mother of his 5 children. The sheer brutality of what had been done was immediately clear. Blood seeped from the loosely tied bags, staining the freezer walls and pooling at its base. Beside the freezer, partially hidden beneath an old sheet, lay the weapon, a hacksaw. Its blade was still stained with blood, dried and crusted from days of lying untouched. The officers could feel their stomachs churn as the gravity of the situation hit them. A woman who had been the cornerstone of her family and a pillar of the church community had met a violent and unspeakable end within her own home. By the 8th of August, the news had spread like wildfire through Winter Haven. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones, disbelief etched on their faces. How could this happen in the home of a preacher who had always preached love and forgiveness? The Dawson family had been seen as the epitome of grace and unity. Yet now their home was a crime scene, and their patriarch, Caleb Dawson, was the prime suspect. The investigation moved swiftly. Caleb was brought in for questioning that same day. He looked haggard and worn, his usual commanding presence diminished into something fragile and broken. Authorities noted how his hands trembled slightly as he sat down, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Caleb admitted to killing Lily, but insisted that his actions were not born of malice or cruelty. He spoke of a betrayal so deep and devastating that it had consumed him in ways he hadn't thought possible. He didn't elaborate further, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Neighbors, too, were interviewed in the days following the discovery. Many described Caleb and Lily as a loving couple, though some mentioned that Lily had seemed distant in recent months. One neighbor recalled seeing Caleb loading something heavy into the trunk of his car late one night the previous week, but at the time, they thought nothing of it. Another mentioned hearing muffled shouting from the house on the night of August 5th, though they couldn't make out the words. As the evidence began to mount, a clearer picture of what had transpired started to emerge. Forensics confirmed that the blood on the hacksaw matched Lily's, and additional traces of blood were found on the basement floor, hastily scrubbed but still detectable. Security footage from a nearby hardware store showed Caleb purchasing the hacksaw on the 3rd of August, just days before the murder. His movements after the purchase were equally telling, withdrawn, erratic, and avoiding any close interactions with neighbors or friends. By August 20th, the authorities had built a strong case. The timeline of events, the physical evidence, and Caleb's partial confession all pointed to his guilt. The prosecution prepared to bring him to trial, knowing that the details of the case would shock the community. What they didn't yet know were the secrets Caleb hinted at during his interrogation, the betrayal that he claimed had driven him to commit such a heinous act. The town of Winter Haven braced itself as the story began to unravel. The once respected preacher was now the central figure in a crime that revealed a dark and twisted reality lurking beneath the surface of his seemingly perfect life. Each piece of evidence, every new detail, added another layer of complexity to a case that would forever change how the community saw the Dawson family. What could have driven a man of faith to such depths of violence? The answers lay ahead, but for now, the air in Winter Haven was thick with shock, sorrow, and an unshakable sense of betrayal. The Dawson family was a picture of stability in Winter Haven. Caleb Dawson, at 40 years old, was not just the preacher of Grace Revival Church, but a symbol of faith and resilience in the community. His fiery sermons, often centered on themes of loyalty, integrity, and forgiveness, drew congregants from neighboring towns. He was the kind of man others admired, a family leader with a clear sense of purpose. His wife, Lily Dawson, 37, was the quiet but steadfast figure behind him, managing their household and raising their 5 children with an air of calmness that others envied. Together, they were seen as a perfect team. Caleb, the forceful visionary, and Lily, the nurturing cornerstone of the family. Their children, aged 5 to 16, were often seen trailing behind their parents at church events. Lily, with her patient smile, balanced the demands of motherhood and her duties as the preacher's wife with grace. To the congregation, she was the embodiment of devotion and selflessness. Caleb often spoke of his family in sermons, weaving their shared experiences into lessons on morality and unity. It was hard for anyone to imagine cracks in their carefully crafted facade. But cracks had begun to form. Caleb's sermons, which once brimmed with energy, had grown darker, more focused on sin and betrayal. Those close to him noticed his temper flare at the smallest of inconveniences, his once jovial demeanor replaced by a brooding intensity. Lily, though still composed in public, seemed distant, her laughter less frequent, and her gaze often lost in thought. Behind the closed doors of their home, the tension between them simmered. It began subtly in early 2013, with Caleb noticing odd behaviors. Lily would step out to take phone calls late at night, her tone hushed but unmistakably tense. There were new routines she never explained, unexpected outings, long drives, and an increasing unwillingness to share details of her day. On more than one occasion, Caleb overheard cryptic snippets of her conversations, often punctuated by awkward pauses when she noticed him nearby. Caleb dismissed these incidents at first, chalking them up to the stresses of daily life. But as the weeks passed, the signs became harder to ignore. Caleb's suspicions grew heavier in June 2013 when he walked into their bedroom and saw Lily hastily shutting down her phone, her expression betraying a mix of guilt and fear. Though she brushed off his questions, Caleb's intuition told him that something was deeply wrong. The trust he once held for his wife began to erode, replaced by an unsettling paranoia. Adding to Caleb's growing unease was the presence of his father, Jeremiah Dawson, a charismatic retired preacher who had always been a larger-than-life figure in Caleb's life. Jeremiah was charming, eloquent, and had an easy way with people, qualities that made him both revered and envied. He frequently visited the Dawson household, his relationship with Lily warm and, to Caleb, increasingly suspicious. Jeremiah's knack for commanding attention, even in Caleb's home, began to feel intrusive. Caleb couldn't shake the nagging feeling that his father's influence extended far beyond what was appropriate. The breaking point came in July 2013. Consumed by doubt and desperate for clarity, Caleb ordered DNA tests for their 5 children. He had collected the samples covertly, sending them off with a prayer that his fears would be proven unfounded. But when the results arrived, they shattered his world. None of the children were biologically his, not one. As the reality of the betrayal sank in, Caleb felt his foundation crumble. His father, the man who had taught him to live a life of principle and faith, had fathered all 5 of his children. The scope of the deception was incomprehensible. For over a decade, the 2 people he trusted most had built a life on a lie. The knowledge consumed him, eating away at his resolve to maintain composure. Every interaction with Lily and Jeremiah became a silent battle, his rage barely contained beneath the surface. Caleb didn't confront them immediately. Instead, he let the secret fester, his mind racing through every memory, re-examining every interaction with suspicion and bitterness. He avoided Lily as much as he could, retreating into his work at the church. But his sermons became laced with thinly veiled references to betrayal, the passion, in his words turning to venom. On the 5th of August, the tension finally erupted. That evening, after the children were in bed, Caleb confronted Lily. The conversation began quietly, his voice low and trembling as he laid out the evidence he had gathered. Lily, blindsided, tried to deny it at first, but Caleb's accusations grew louder and more forceful. He spoke of the DNA tests, of Jeremiah's repeated visits, and of the years of lies. Lily's defenses crumbled, and she admitted the truth. The argument escalated rapidly. Caleb's voice, once commanding but measured, became an enraged roar. Lily, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, pleaded for forgiveness, but her words only fueled Caleb's fury. In a moment of blind rage, Caleb grabbed the nearest object, a heavy wrench from the garage where they stood, and struck Lily. As she collapsed to the floor, his anger gave way to panic. His actions, once fueled by betrayal, now spiraled into desperation. What followed was a blur of calculated madness. Caleb, determined to erase any trace of his crime, worked through the night to dispose of Lily's body. He retrieved a hacksaw from the basement and began the gruesome process of dismembering her remains. The methodical nature of his actions stood in stark contrast to the chaos of his emotions. His mind raced with thoughts of self-preservation, the weight of what he had done pressing down on him with every cut. By the early hours of the 6th of August, Lily's remains were packed into garbage bags and placed in the basement freezer. Caleb cleaned the garage with an almost obsessive precision, scrubbing away every trace of blood. As the sun rose, he stood in the quiet of his home, the evidence of his crime hidden, but the enormity of it impossible to escape. He showered, changed into his preacher's robes, and went to the church to deliver a sermon on redemption, his voice steady, even as his mind unraveled. The investigation into Lily Dawson's murder quickly became one of the most complex and emotionally charged cases Winter Haven had ever seen. By the 9th of August, 2013, the local police were fully immersed in piecing together the events that had led to her tragic death. Every piece of evidence they uncovered not only painted a clearer picture of the crime, but also revealed disturbing layers of dysfunction within the Dawson family. Witness testimonies became pivotal in shaping the narrative. Neighbors and church members, initially reluctant to speak ill of a family so revered, began sharing details that hinted at a darker reality. One longtime congregant recalled seeing Jeremiah Dawson, Caleb's father, frequently visiting the Dawson home at odd hours. These visits, described as intensely private, were unusual even for a close family member. A neighbor described how Lily often appeared withdrawn, even sad, in the months leading up to her death, a stark contrast to the warm and vibrant woman the community had known for years. Another neighbor mentioned overhearing raised voices on multiple occasions, particularly involving Caleb and Lily. Though the details of these arguments remained unclear. By August 15, 2013, the detectives had their first major breakthrough. A warrant to search the Dawson household uncovered Lily's old phone, tucked away in a desk drawer in the living room. Forensic analysis revealed a series of text messages exchanged between her and Jeremiah over the course of several years. The texts ranged from casual conversations to overtly romantic and suggestive messages, leaving little doubt about the nature of their relationship. The messages provided a devastating glimpse into Lily's emotional struggles. While she expressed guilt and hesitation about her affair with Jeremiah, she also confided feelings of isolation and frustration in her marriage to Caleb, describing him as overly controlling and emotionally distant. The most damning evidence came in the form of the DNA results. By August 17, 2013, the investigators confirmed that none of Caleb and Lily's 5 children shared Caleb's DNA. Instead, Jeremiah Dawson was identified as the biological father of all 5 children. This revelation sent shockwaves through the community, turning what was already a deeply personal tragedy into a public scandal. For Caleb, this confirmation became the cornerstone of his defense. He claimed that this betrayal by his wife and father was what drove him to the edge. But the detectives didn't stop there. As they dug deeper, they discovered troubling details about Caleb's actions leading up to the murder. His internet search history showed repeated searches on dismemberment, body disposal, and chemical cleaning agents, all within the week before Lily's death. These searches coincided with his purchase of the hacksaw from a hardware store on the 3rd of August, 2013. The receipt, still crumpled in his pocket when he was arrested, served as a chilling reminder of the premeditation involved. Each new piece of evidence painted a more harrowing picture of the Dawson family's private life. The relationship between Caleb and his father, once seen as a bond of mentorship and shared faith, was revealed to be deeply fractured. Jeremiah, who had built his reputation as a charismatic and compassionate preacher, was now described by witnesses as manipulative and egotistical. Some church members recounted how Jeremiah often made dismissive remarks about Caleb's sermons, subtly undermining his authority. Others described him as a man who thrived on control, using his charm to manipulate those around him. His affair with Lily, spanning over a decade, now appeared as yet another extension of his domineering nature. As the evidence mounted, so did the emotional toll on the Dawson children. By the time the trial began in early September 2013, their lives had been irrevocably changed. The 5 children, whose identities were kept private due to their ages, were placed in the care of Caleb's younger sister, Deborah. The eldest, a 16-year-old boy, was described as struggling the most. He had idolized his father and was now grappling with the dual grief of losing both parents, one to murder, the other to incarceration. His younger siblings, still too young to fully comprehend the betrayal and loss, often asked questions that no adult could answer without breaking down. The trial itself was as emotionally charged as the investigation. Jeremiah Dawson took the stand in mid-September, his demeanor as composed and confident as ever. He denied any wrongdoing, casting himself as a victim of Lily's advances. According to him, she had pursued him out of loneliness and dissatisfaction in her marriage. He described their relationship as a mistake, but stopped short of taking full responsibility. His testimony only deepened the divide within the family. Caleb, seated just feet away, glared at his father with an intensity that unnerved the courtroom. The children, seated behind their uncle, struggled to reconcile the image of their grandfather with the man described on the stand. The emotional weight of the trial extended beyond the family. Church members, many of whom had looked to Caleb and Jeremiah for spiritual guidance, were now questioning their own beliefs. Some congregants admitted feeling betrayed, not just by the affair, but by the fact that their spiritual leaders had failed to live up to the principles they preached. The church itself, once a haven for the community, became a symbol of broken trust. The prosecution built its case methodically, emphasizing Caleb's internet searches, the receipt for the hacksaw, and the DNA results as irrefutable evidence of both premeditation and motive. The defense, however, leaned heavily on Caleb's emotional state, painting him as a man pushed to the brink by the ultimate betrayal. They argued that while his actions were undeniably horrific, they were born from a place of unimaginable pain and humiliation. As the trial neared its conclusion in late September 2013, the emotional wreckage was clear. The Dawson family, once seen as a model of faith and unity, was now fractured beyond repair. Each testimony, every new piece of evidence, served as a reminder of the profound betrayal that had led to Lily's tragic death. The community of Winter Haven, too, was left grappling with the aftermath, its faith in its leaders and in the sanctity of family forever shaken. The trial of Caleb Dawson began in early November 2014, drawing national attention to the small town of Winter Haven. The courtroom was packed each day, with reporters, church members, and curious locals gathering to witness the unraveling of a man who had once been the community's moral compass. The trial was not just about a murder. It was a reckoning for a family and a community devastated by secrets, betrayal, and unimaginable violence. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense from the start. Caleb sat at the defense table, a shadow of the man he once was. His sharp, commanding presence had given way to a hollow, distant gaze, as though he was already resigned to his fate. Across the room, the family's remaining ties sat fragmented. Jeremiah Dawson, Caleb's father, attended the proceedings only sporadically, his once proud demeanor tarnished by his central role in the scandal. The Dawson children, now living with relatives, were conspicuously absent, shielded from the trauma of reliving their family's darkest days. The prosecution wasted no time presenting the chilling evidence against Caleb. Over the course of the trial, jurors were shown graphic photos of the crime scene. The dismembered remains of Lily Dawson, the blood-stained hacksaw, and the freezer where she had been hidden. Caleb's internet history, revealing searches on dismemberment and body disposal, was laid bare. Each piece of evidence painted a vivid picture of premeditation, leaving little room for doubt about Caleb's intent. The DNA results were a pivotal moment in the trial. The revelation that none of Caleb's children were biologically his, and that his own father, Jeremiah, was their true parent, was met with audible gasps from the courtroom audience. It was a scandal that transcended the murder itself, shaking the foundation of the Dawson family and the church community. The prosecution emphasized the betrayal Caleb must have felt upon learning this truth, but they argued that even such a revelation could not justify the gruesome murder of Lily Dawson. The defense, in contrast, focused on Caleb's emotional state. They painted him as a man pushed to the brink by years of deception and humiliation. They called expert witnesses who testified about the psychological toll of such a betrayal, suggesting that Caleb had acted in a moment of temporary insanity. But the prosecution countered with evidence of Caleb's calculated actions: the purchase of the hacksaw days before the murder, the methodical cleaning of the crime scene, and his chilling decision to continue preaching while Lily's remains lay hidden in their home. By November 15, 2014, the jury had heard weeks of testimony and deliberated for just a few hours before reaching their verdict. When the foreperson announced Caleb's guilt, the courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. The judge, stern and deliberate, described the case as one of the most shocking betrayals of trust he had ever encountered. He sentenced Caleb Dawson to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The weight of the sentence hung heavily in the air, a grim finality that left even those who supported the decision feeling unsettled. Jeremiah Dawson, though not criminally charged, faced his own punishment in the court of public opinion. As news of his role in the scandal spread, he became a pariah in Winter Haven. Church members who once admired him for his charisma now avoided him, their expressions turning cold when they crossed paths. His involvement with Lily and the betrayal of his own son made him a symbol of moral failure. Despite his efforts to defend himself, claiming that he had been manipulated by Lily's advances, the community saw through his excuses. By the end of the trial, Jeremiah had all but disappeared from public life, retreating into a solitary existence. The aftermath of the trial left the Dawson children caught in an emotional storm. Placed in the care of Caleb's younger sister, Deborah, they struggled to rebuild their lives. The eldest, now 17, was deeply resentful of his grandfather, Jeremiah, and harbored complex feelings toward his father. He had grown up idolizing Caleb, only to see that image shattered. His siblings, especially the younger ones, grappled with confusion and grief, often asking questions that no adult could answer without breaking down. Therapy sessions became a regular part of their lives, though healing felt like an impossible task. The community of Winter Haven, once united by the Dawson family's leadership at Grace Revival Church, found itself fractured. The church, once a place of hope and fellowship, became a painful reminder of betrayal. Attendance plummeted as congregants struggled to reconcile their faith with the actions of the family they had revered. Sermons that once inspired now felt hollow, and the church's doors eventually closed, its reputation beyond repair. The story of Caleb Dawson lingered in Winter Haven long after the trial ended. It was retold in whispers at community gatherings, a cautionary tale of how secrets, infidelity, and betrayal could spiral into tragedy. For the Dawson family, the wounds left behind were deep and permanent, a legacy of pain that no verdict could erase. The once bright image of their family was now a shadow, a reminder that even the most trusted figures could harbor darkness.